Alright, so this Saturday, March 3rd, we have UFC 222. It's going to be headlined by a women's featherweight championship fight between Cris Cyborg and Yana Kunitskaya. Now, the card from top to bottom is pretty solid. There definitely are some very entertaining fights. For example, Mackenzie Dern is going to be making her UFC debut. We have John Dodson versus Pedro Munhoz. I think is a very interesting fight. And then, of course, on the main card, we have Sean O'Malley is going to be taking on Andrei Soukhamthath. And then the co-main event between Frankie, Edgar, and Brian Ortega. I cannot wait to see that fight and see what goes down inside that octagon on Saturday night. Now, for casual fans, I don't think it's a pay-per-view that is worth shelling out $65 for. Now, I do think it's a solid card. I will be watching, and it should be a fun Saturday night for fights. So with that being said, let's get into these main card predictions. Alright, so for the first fight on the main card, we have a women's bantamweight bout between Cat Zingano and Ketlen Vieira. Now, Cat Zingano, right, made her UFC debut back in 2013, and in that fight, she beat Miesha Tate, right? We all know that later on in her career, Miesha Tate went on to win the bantamweight title. She was a champion. And then in her second fight, she also beat Amanda Nunes, and Amanda Nunes is the current champion of the women's bantamweight division. She's the best fighter in that division, and in that fight, Amanda Nunes came out really strong, really aggressive, was pressuring early, was able to get on top of Cat Zingano, landed some heavy ground and pound, right? Busted her up pretty good in the early rounds. And what happens with Amanda Nunes, right, prior to the second Valentina Shevchenko fight, she really had the tendency to put pressure right away, to be extremely aggressive, right? She puts a lot behind every single one of her strikes, and it forces her to gas out, right? She tires out pretty quickly. And in that fight, that's what happened against Zingano. She gassed out, and that is not a really good game plan when you're going up against someone who is in as good a shape as Cat Zingano. She's in tremendous shape. She's a great wrestler, and in the later rounds, that's what happened. Zingano was able to get the takedowns on a tired Amanda Nunes, landed some heavy ground and pound, some clean elbows, busted her up bad, and got the TKO victory. Now, that was the last time that Amanda Nunes lost inside the octagon. And it goes to prove that Cat Zingano has what it takes to beat some of the best fighters. If you come in right away and you beat girls like Miesha Tate, Amanda Nunes, right? The only issue is that the next two fights, right, her last two fights, she's lost. There was the fight against Ronda Rousey where she was submitted in 14 seconds. Wasn't really a big enough of a sample size to be able to judge the kind of progress that she made, being that she got caught in an armbar right away, was submitted in a short amount of time, and it doesn't really go to show anything about Cat Zingano. It just happened. It's one of those things. And it was against Ronda Rousey, who was one of the most dominant women champions in the history of the sport. And in her last fight against Juliana Pena, she was just outgrinded, man. In the beginning of the fight, she came out extremely aggressive, Zingano did. And she got takedowns immediately. The only issue is that she wasn't really doing anything on top. She wasn't really landing any significant blows. She wasn't able to secure top control a lot of the times that she was able to take Juliana Pena down. And what happened is she eventually got reversed. So in the first round, it looked like it was Zingano's round, right? She was out grappling her. She was out wrestling her. I believe she was on top of Juliana Pena for about the first 2.5 minutes of the first round. But after that, she would get the takedown, she would secure the takedown, and then she would eventually just get reversed. And that goes to show, the type of ground game, right, that Juliana Pena possesses. She's a very talented fighter, so she was just outlasted in that fight. But Cat Zingano is very talented. She's solid on the feet, right? She's a solid striker. Her wrestling is great, and she's in excellent condition. She has the experience. She stepped inside of the octagon with some of the best women in that division. The only issue I have with Cat Zingano at this point is her inactivity. She made her UFC debut in 2013, and since then, up until this year, she's only fought once each year. So this is going to be her first fight of 2018. It's the last time that she stepped inside the octagon was back in 2016. So it's a bit of a layoff for her. It is a bit of a layoff for her, and it's going to be interesting to see how she comes back. It also doesn't help that she's going up against one of the top up-and-coming prospects in that division, Ketlen Vieira. Now, Vieira is currently 9-0, 3-0 in the UFC, has looked good in all of her last 3 fights. She beat Ashley Evans-Smith. In her last fight, she submitted Sarah McMahon in the second round via arm triangle. Very impressive performance. Now, in that fight, McMahon came out aggressive, right? She's a very good wrestler, was able to secure the takedown, but going to the ground with a girl that has as good jiu-jitsu as Ketlen Vieira is a very dangerous game, and it showed. She was able to get, some dominant positions in that fight. Her ground game is really good judo. In terms of striking, she isn't really known for her striking abilities. She doesn't have fast hands. She doesn't really have power. Her reflexes are a little bit slow. Her movement isn't all that. But once she gets the fight to the ground, it's a dangerous game to play with her. It really is. She's so talented. Like I said, she's on the come up. She's young, and this is going to be a huge challenge for her in Cat Zingano, being that Zingano has the experience on her. Zingano has the better names on her resume. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Now, I do think that Zingano will come out and be as aggressive as usual. Now, it's up to Vieira to decide whether or not she's going to be equally as aggressive or if she's going to be patient, and I think you need to be patient against Cat Zingano. We saw that with Amanda Nunes. She tried to be aggressive. She tried to put the pressure on early. She tried to get Zingano out of there in the first round, or as soon as she could, and it didn't work out for her. You know what I mean? So I think Vieira is going to have to be patient, and on top of all that, right, as good as a grappler that Zingano is, Vieira is probably, I would say, equally as good a grappler. She's a very difficult girl to get to the ground. I believe she has defended 91% of the takedowns attempted on her show. So it's very difficult to get Vieira to the ground. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, and if the layoff does indeed affect Cat Zingano. She's coming off of two fight losing streak, so she's looking to get some of the momentum back. She's looking to get back into the win column. There's a lot riding, there's a lot on the line, I should say, in this fight for Cat Zingano. I just think that Vieira's young. She's hungry. She's on the come up. She's continued to stay active. She had 2 fights in 2017, and she's already fighting in 2018. It's barely March. So she's staying active, right? She's staying inside the octagon, and she's continuing to get better. So I do think that Zingano will land some takedowns early on. It's just about whether or not she's going to be able to secure top control, if she's going to be able to keep Vieira on the ground. Vieira is very active off of her back. We saw that in the McMahon fight. And I don't think that you submit somebody as experienced and as good as Sarah McMahon the way she did if you're not talented. So I think that Vieira is going to outlast her. I think she's going to outgrind her, similar to the way that Juliana Pena did. I think she'll get some reversals if she's on her back. She's very active. I think she'll come close to securing a few submissions, but it's going to be a very close fight. It's going to be a tough contest, but I do have to give Ketlen Vieira the benefit of the doubt and pick her to win this fight via unanimous decision. Now, for the next fight, we have a heavyweight matchup between Andrei Arlovski and Stefan Struve. Now, both of these guys, right, are extremely experienced. They're veterans. They've been in the sport a long time. Andrei Arlovski made his UFC debut back in the year 2000. That's 18 years ago. I'm sorry. It's been a long time. Obviously, he hasn't been with the UFC throughout the entirety of his career. He did venture out into different organizations or different promotions and had success. At one point, back in his heyday, he was one of the more exciting fighters. He's been around a while, so is Stefan Struve. Stefan Struve made his UFC debut back in 2009. Both these guys have been around for quite some time. They've had their highs. They've had their lows. Their best days are certainly behind them. But they're still here, right? They're still giving it a go. They're still looking to get, another victory on their resume. I'm assuming both of them are still looking for one last push at the title shot. I don't think they will get it. I don't think they're at that point in their career. I think they're way past their primes. But they do have some solid attributes. They do have a little bit left in the tank to give, at least to put on a good performance for Saturday night. Now, Andrei Arlovski, right, is a very, very well-rounded fighter. He's got good boxing. He's a good striker overall. He's a very good grappler, very good on the ground, and very physically strong. Obviously there's that Sambo background that he has. A very well-rounded fighter. And the only knock I have on Andrei Arlovski, right, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, the dude has a glass chin. He is coming off of a victory over Junior Albini, right, who was a guy that was a very good striker, right, very mobile, pretty athletic for his size, had power, was coming off of that knockout against Timothy Johnson in his UFC debut. And a lot of people were picking Albini to just knock Arlovski out cold because he does have the tendency to get knocked out cleanly the first time someone's able to land a clean shot on him. But it didn't happen. He was patient in that fight. He was out striking Albini. You could really tell the difference in experience. You know what I mean? And it did go to show that Arlovski wasn't completely done yet. Obviously, like I said earlier, he's not going to contend for a title anymore. He just doesn't have it in him to beat the top guys in the division. But it proved that he can still hang around with the guys on the roster. The guys in that division, at least the up-and-comers. Now, although it was a good performance that Arlovski put up against Junior Albini, albeit I was caught by surprise or I was caught off guard because I did pick Junior Albini to win that fight. If I remember correctly, I picked Albini to win the fight via knockout in the first round. You know, even with that performance, he's 1-5 in his last 6 fights. That was his first win in nearly 2 years. So he's definitely right on the tail end of his career. Now he's going up against Stefan Struve, right, who doesn't necessarily have much to give in terms of title contendency either. You know what I mean? He's coming off of a loss against Alexander Volkov. It was a very entertaining fight. Both guys were tagging each other up before Struve got caught. In the third round, I believe he was knocked out. But nevertheless, I believe it was fight of the night. So it was a very entertaining fight. It was a good matchup between both guys. A hard-fought contest. You know, both guys laid it all on the line, that fight. You know, but Stefan Struve is a good striker. He's a good kickboxer. He's the tallest guy in that division. I think he stands at about 6'11". His ground game is very good. Obviously, being that he's tall, he's long, he's rangy. You know, it makes it a little bit easier for him to wrap himself around guys and submit them. You know what I mean? I believe over 15 of his professional wins come via submission, so his ground game is really good. Now, in this fight, I just think that Arlovski is going to be able to put the pressure on him. I think he's going to be able to pick his shots. I think Struve's going to be vulnerable to the body. You know, if Arlovski decides to attack the legs, I think that's going to be a smart move on his part. I would advise Arlovski to not attempt a takedown, you know, and put himself at risk of getting choked out. You know what I mean? I don't want him to shoot for a reckless takedown, you know, and try to hold Stefan Struve down and then get caught in a guillotine or give up his back or something like that. So I think he's going to have to do a good job of just moving around, you know, just really breaking Stefan Struve by attacking the legs, attacking the body, and then opening up with some combinations up high. You know, I just trust Arlovski at this point in this fight. I think that he's the better striker. Although both these dudes do have glass chins, either one of them can get caught. I just think Arlovski's more powerful, and I think there's a higher percentage, right, or a higher chance that Arlovski's going to be able to land that shot before Stefan Struve does. I'm not confident in this pick. I'm not confident in picking Andrei Arlovski, but I'm gonna have to pick Arlovski to win this fight via TKO in the third round. Next up, we have a bantamweight bout between Sugar Sean O'Malley and Andrei Soukhamthath. Now, Andrei Soukhamthath made his UFC debut right around this time last year. I believe it was March 4th of 2017. Made his UFC debut against Albert Morales, and then after that stepped inside the octagon with Alejandro Perez. Now, both of those fights he lost via split decision. He was very much in both of those fights. It could have gone either way. I remember in the Alejandro Perez fight, he was actually winning. He clipped Alejandro Perez, a few times in that fight. Hurt him. You know what I mean? And I don't remember if he was really close to finishing that fight. I do know that he tagged him, dropped him a few times, was winning the boxing exchanges, had a really good jab. And that's what Andrei Soukhamthath is. He's a very good boxer. Unfortunately, right around the late second round and all the third round, he kind of, you know, took his foot off the gas, and it allowed for Perez to land a few combinations, right, to gain some consistency in the last round. And eventually, 2 of the judges gave the win, right, or favored Alejandro Perez in that fight. It was a very close fight, but recently he is coming off of a win over Luke Cool Hand Sanders. Now, Sanders was tagging him up in that fight. He came out very aggressive, was outboxing him, tagged him hard a few times in the first round and even in the second round. But in the second is when we saw Soukhamthath get a little bit more comfortable, right? Started landing some combinations, started landing the jab, but still Sanders' speed was a big problem for Soukhamthath. As usually Soukhamthath is a little bit of a slow starter, and he did start off slow in that fight. It did take him quite some time before finding his range, right? Before finding, a little bit of consistency in terms of pressure, right? In terms of going forward and landing on Sanders. So Sanders was tagging him up hard, man. He did eat some hard shots on the chin. But in the second round, I believe Sanders kind of went in, right, to engage in a boxing fight, right? And he got caught. He got caught with the straight. I don't remember if it was the left or the right, but it dropped him. Soukhamthath jumped all over him, and eventually the ref stepped in and finished the fight. So it was a good win for Soukhamthath against a very competent opponent. A good way to get back into the win column and carry some momentum going forward, because he's a young fighter. He's talented, right? He's a very good boxer. He does have some submission victories under his belt. He's improving in that aspect. Now, in this fight, he's going up against one of the UFC's top prospects, if you will, right? This is a guy in Sean O'Malley, right, who has a lot of hype behind him. The UFC and many of the fans are expecting this guy to be the next big thing. He made his debut on Dana White's Contender Series. Got a knockout win in the first round. Looked pretty good in that fight. And he made his official UFC debut against Terrion Ware back in December of 2017. So he's relatively new to the UFC right now. In his fight against Terrion Ware, it was a very tough fight for him, right? Terrion Ware is a good boxer, has experience, likes to put pressure, likes to come forward consistently, and did have some success in that fight, and especially in the first round against Sean O'Malley, I believe it was. I just know that going into the third round, I had it 1-1. Obviously, Sean O'Malley pulled away in the third round and came away with the victory, but it was a tough fight for him. Man, Terrion Ware is no slouch, you know what I mean? He's no bum. Although he hasn't really made any noise in the UFC, I believe he's only had 2 fights in the UFC. But it really went to show just how green Sean O'Malley is. O'Malley's a very good striker. He's long, he's rangy, he's very unorthodox, good head movement. He has some solid kicks. We've seen some of his grappling, we've seen some of his ground game, and he seems to be, a pretty well-rounded fighter, but he's still very green, he's still very raw, but he's talented, and he's exciting to watch. He likes to stand there, he likes to bang. He's got power in his hands. Now, in the Contender Series fight against Kashakian, he was getting tagged up in the first round before he caught Kashakian and knocked him out. Terrion Ware was landing some shots on him. It's just that O'Malley did do a good job of fighting at range, right, of making sure that Terrion Ware didn't get his back up against the cage and just start, unleashing punches on him to the body and then attacking up high. But O'Malley's very talented. He's a good striker. And in this fight, I'm going to look for the speed advantage of Andrei Soukhamthath to come into play. Soukhamthath is a very good boxer, although he does get off to slow starts. That's the only reason why, I hesitate in picking this fight. Because if you look at a guy like Soukhamthath who has power, who's very fast, who moves pretty well, that's how you beat a guy like O'Malley, who does have the tendency to get gassed out. He did look a little bit gassed in that fight against Terrion Ware in the late second round and in the third round. So the game plan to beat him, right, would be to just move around him, right? Make sure you're moving consistently. Make sure you're active, right? Maybe even try to grapple with him, and get him to the ground. It's just the fact that Soukhamthath gets off to slow starts and he does get tagged up. Pettis tagged him up a few times, as did Luke Sanders, as we saw throughout the first 2 rounds of that fight. For as long as it lasted, he was getting tagged up. So I'm afraid that if O'Malley lands one on him cleanly, he's going to hurt him, and he's going to hurt him badly, because O'Malley does have power. However, Soukhamthath has never been finished, from my understanding. He's never been knocked out, and he's never been submitted. So he's a very tough guy to finish. But I just want to see Soukhamthath be able to execute a game plan that neutralizes O'Malley's strengths, right? That takes O'Malley into the deep waters, tires him out, breaks him, right? And just outboxes him, right? Outclasses him for 3 rounds. But it's very hard for me to say that. I do think O'Malley is going to come into this fight prepared, obviously, and he's extremely confident. A lot of people like to see it as cocky. It may very well be the case with him, but he's confident in his abilities. He's very exciting. He's got power. He's long. He's rangy, as I said earlier. So I think that O'Malley's going to do a good job of establishing that right away, establishing the jab, making sure that Soukhamthath doesn't get on the inside consistently. So I'm going to have to pick Sean O'Malley to win this fight via TKO in the second round. It's going to be a very tough fight. This is another toss-up for me. It's another pick-em for me. A very tough fight to call, but I'm going to have to give the edge to Sean O'Malley, say that he catches him in the second round and puts him away for the first time in Andrei Soukhamthath's career. Now, next up, we have a featherweight bout between Frankie Edgar and Brian Ortega. Now, Frankie Edgar is another veteran of the game, right? He's been in the UFC a long time. He was a former champion in the lightweight division, beat BJ Penn, who's one of the greatest fighters of all time, twice. He eventually made the move down to the 145-pound division, as some of these bigger guys were developing new ways, right, to cut weight. Obviously, you see guys like Khabib Nurmagomedov, Tony Ferguson, these big guys that walk around at about 200 pounds are able to cut all this weight and make the 155-pound weight limit. It's just crazy. So Frankie Edgar is a relatively small guy. I believe he walks at around 160, 165 pounds. So he made the move to the 145-pound division, and he is still one of the ones on top of the game, man. This guy's one of the best fighters in this division. Aside from the losses against Jose Aldo, he's beaten some of the best fighters in this division. He's beaten Cub Swanson. He knocked out Chad Mendes in the first round. He beat Jeremy Stevens, who, as we see right now, is on a tear, is knocking people out left and right. So he's just a very, very good fighter. Great, actually. He's a great boxer, great wrestler, very good on the ground as well. He's a class act, and he is a master of his craft, man. So he's just, it's very pleasing, I should say, to watch somebody, as good as Frankie Edgar, someone that has been as dominant as he is for so long, you know what I mean? And it seems as if he hasn't lost a step, in his game. He's still very, very good and very capable of being able to win the belt now that Max Holloway is the champion. He was next in line. He was scheduled to fight Max Holloway. Unfortunately, Holloway had to pull out with an injury. Prayers out to him. Hopefully he makes a speedy recovery. And now Brian Ortega stepped in. So Brian Ortega is this dude on the come up. He's undefeated, right? He's one of the top prospects in the UFC. He's making a name for himself quickly. He's 5-0 in the UFC. Each of his past 5 wins, he has finished his opponent in the 3rd round, and some of them he's been down on the scorecards. Against Renato Moicano, he was down on the scorecards. Moicano shot for a takedown in the 3rd round and fell into a guillotine. He submitted him just like that. Cub Swanson, Brian Ortega finished him in the 3rd round. So this guy knows how to finish fights at the right time, man. Brian Ortega is extremely talented. He's got a chin on him. He's a pretty good boxer. His movement is getting better. He needs to work on his defense. He does have the tendency to get hit quite a bit. Cub Swanson was starting to tag him up in the 2nd round. So he does need to work on his defense, but he's extremely talented. The sky is the limit for this kid. It really is. He's a strong grappler, and his jiu-jitsu is out of this world. He's a black belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There are very few people, not just in the division, but on the entire UFC roster that can hang with this dude on the ground. That's how good he is. That's where he makes his money. He's extremely tough. He's durable, and like I said earlier, the kid hasn't lost. He doesn't know what it feels like to taste defeat. So he's looking to continue to push for a title shot. And if he beats a guy like Frankie Edgar, it's going to put him next in line to fight Max Holloway. And in my opinion, I do think that Brian Ortega is the biggest threat to Max Holloway's throne. I think stylistically they match up very well. Although Max Holloway is very good on the ground, he's no slouch. I just think that Brian Ortega has the best chance of anybody inside the top 5 really to be able to beat Max Holloway. But that's another topic for another video. First, he has to get past Frankie Edgar, who's a very tough stylistic matchup for this dude. I think one of the things that a lot of people say about Brian Ortega is the fact that he hasn't necessarily faced a guy like Frankie Edgar. Obviously, Cub Swanson has a big win for Brian Ortega. A very big win. Cub's been around. He's been around in the game for a long time, and he's been very good. He's beaten some very good competition. But beating a guy like Cub Swanson is what somebody who wants to make a push for the title needs to do. He's a gatekeeper at best. So with that being said, Ortega got the win against Cub Swanson, and now he's in this position. He's going up against Frankie Edgar, who's next, right, to number 1. In the division, so it's gonna be a very, very good fight. I can't wait to see how it plays out. Personally, right, I'm gonna say that I am a Brian Ortega fan. I hope that he gets this victory. I would love to see him contend for a title. I'm a big fan of his. But going into the breakdown of this fight, Frankie Edgar, his game plan is very simple, or it should be very simple. Outbox him. Do not engage in any sort of clinch. Do not shoot for a takedown. Do what you got to do. Go on the inside, land a few combinations, but get out as quickly as possible, because Brian Ortega will grab something. He'll grab an arm, he'll grab an ankle, he'll grab your neck, and he will not let go. He's going to clamp his arms together, and he's going to squeeze as tight as possible and get you to tap out. So Frankie Edgar needs to outbox him. He needs to be on his A game like he always is, right? And he just needs to flat out continuously move consistently, man. If you have to run away a majority of the fight, if you just have to, kind of just jab him up, from a distance, even though he is a shorter, smaller fighter, if you just have to use the jab, man, get inside when you have to, but make sure that you're consistently moving, and there's nothing wrong with that. You're trying to get this win, you're trying to secure this win, and you're trying to get a crack at the title. Now, for Brian Ortega, he has to pressure. And although it's a very dangerous game because Frankie Edgar is a very good counterpuncher and he's very fast and he does have power, he's going to have to pressure, and his best chance is to get Frankie Edgar to the ground and show that his jiu-jitsu is superior to that of Frankie Edgar's. that's what Brian Ortega has to do in this fight. I just don't think Ortega's boxing is good enough to hang with Frankie Edgar on the feet. Obviously, he can catch him. Frankie Edgar's chinny, although he does recover pretty quickly. He has gotten wobbled. Jeremy Stevens wobbled him out too, right? So he can't get hurt. I think Ortega can hurt him if he catches him cleanly, but it's going to be very hard because of how well Frankie Edgar moves. And I think one of the big factors in my prediction is the fact that it's a 3-round fight. Now, if this was for an interim belt and it was a 5-round fight, I do think Ortega would win the fight, because in 5 rounds, it's going to provide more opportunities for Ortega to be able to sink into submission, more opportunities for Ortega to be able to get Frankie Edgar to the ground and go to work. But in a 3-round fight, it's only 15 minutes instead of 25, obviously. So there's not going to be as many opportunities. That's why Ortega's going to have to pressure right off the bat, try to get on the inside, try to engage in a clinch, and just go to town on Frankie Edgar in terms of jiu-jitsu, just like he did with Cub Swanson. But I think it's going to be very hard. It's going to be very hard, especially because Frankie Edgar is always in great shape. He's such a great striker, and I think that the fact that it's a shorter fight is going to make it a little bit easier for Frankie Edgar to stay, on the outside of Brian Ortega and to just outbox him and outclass him on the feet. So although I would love to see Brian Ortega come away with this win, as a big fan of his, and I hope he proves me wrong, but I'm going to have to pick Frankie Edgar to win this fight via unanimous decision. Now, this pick is for the sake of the video. I haven't been doing that well on the previous 2 cards on my predictions, right? So I'm doing this for the sake of the video. I think Frankie Edgar is the safer pick because he's more well-rounded, and I think he's better suited to win this fight if it goes to a decision. But I really do hope that Brian Ortega proves me wrong, and I will be ecstatic if he's able to get this win. But like I said earlier, I'm going to pick Frankie Edgar to win this fight via unanimous decision. Now, in the main event of the evening, we have the women's featherweight championship title fight between Yana Kunitskaya and the champion Cris Cyborg. Now, Cris Cyborg, right, is the best women fighter in all of the UFC, and that's with little hesitation that I say it. She is the best woman to fight in the UFC ever. Her boxing is really good, right? She's got crazy power, man, strong leg kicks, and on top of that, she's a very good grappler. She's a solid wrestler. She's very good on the ground as well. So she's a well-rounded fighter, although a lot of people like to pay attention to the power, right, to the boxing and the velocity that she throws her punches with. She's well-rounded, man, and that's why she's so dominant, is because she's very, very good at what she does. She's continuously dominated her opponents. She's coming off of a hard-fought win over Holly Holm, believe it or not. Holly Holm tested her in more ways than one, because Holly Holm is a very, very good boxer, has a professional boxing background, was able to land some clean shots on Cris Cyborg, did some good things in that fight, but at the end of the day, the pressure and the power of Cyborg was just too much, right? And she came away with a decision, but she's continuously knocked out her opponents left and right up until the Holly Holm fight. Before that, she knocked out Tanya Evinger. I can't remember if it was the 2nd or the 3rd round. But Evinger's as tough as nails, and she ate a lot of shots before she finally went down. But Cyborg is just crazy scary. There's not really anything that I need to break down. We all know how good she is. We all know how talented she is. And she's welcoming Yana Kunitskaya to the UFC. This is going to be Kunitskaya's UFC debut, and what a debut to make against the scariest female fighter on the roster. But Kunitskaya is a very, very talented striker. She has the Taekwondo background. She has the kickboxing background, the Muay Thai background. And she's solid in a majority of the facets of the game. You know what I mean? She's solid on the ground. She has experience against some very good fighters. She fought Tanya Evinger twice. The first fight, she actually submitted Tanya Evinger, but I believe there was some sort of controversy revolving the call from the referee, so they overturned that win. In the second fight, unfortunately, she fell short, but Tanya Evinger is as game as they come. So in order for Kunitskaya to be able to win this fight, is to be able to outlast Cris Cyborg. And it's very hard, because at first we knew that Cyborg would get gassed out in the later rounds, mostly because we hadn't really seen her go into the deep waters. But in the Holly Holm fight, she proved that she's in very good shape. She's not just a 2-round fighter, right? She's not just a 10-minute fighter. She can go all 25 rounds, or 25 minutes, I'm sorry. But the way Kunitskaya is going to be able to beat her would be the same game plan for anybody else. Would be either to take her down, right, and hope that you can sink in some type of submission, or just outlast her on the feet. Try to outbox her, keep at range. Make sure you establish the jab. Make sure you're consistently moving and consistently landing without putting yourself in harm's way, but it's very, very hard to do. So I think that there's very few things that Yana Kunitskaya can do to be able to win this fight. The only thing that I do think plays to her advantage or is in her favor is the fact that nobody, including myself, is expecting this lady to win. So that's one thing that's on. There's no pressure, right? No one's expecting her to win, so she can be comfortable in coming up with the game plan. She can be comfortable inside that UFC octagon, knowing that she's heavily overlooked in this fight. Very, very overlooked. So she can go in there knowing that there's nothing to lose. A lot of people are expecting her to go in there and get dominated like nearly all of Cris Cyborg's opponents have. So that's one thing that I do think is on her side. But at the end of the day, Cyborg is just too dominant. Man, she is way too dominant. She's too strong. She puts too much pressure. And when she hits you, you feel it. So I'm going to pick Cris Cyborg to put Yana Kunitskaya away in the second round. I do think it'll be an interesting first round if Kunitskaya can kind of establish the distance, right? You know, utilize her kicks, utilize a jab, and just ensure, right, that she's not putting herself in front of Cyborg and remaining a stationary target. But in the second round, I think is when Cyborg begins to feel her out, begins to gain some momentum and continues to and starts to pressure, right, and find some momentum, find some consistency, and starts to land. And I think that once she starts to land, she'll start attacking the legs, attacking the body, and then going up high. So I'm going to pick Cyborg to win this fight in a dominating fashion, and I'm going to pick her to win this fight via TKO in the second round. Now, if you like this video, make sure to hit the like button. Make sure to subscribe if you have not already. I really appreciate it. Make sure to let me know in the comments down below who you think is going to win, not just in the main event, but in the card as a whole. Let me know your winners, who you think is going to win. Make sure to follow me on Twitter. I'll keep you guys updated on the channel. I'll be tweeting during the fight. And hopefully I can get an opportunity to engage with some of you guys on Twitter, you know, have a conversation with some of you regarding the fights and things like that. But most importantly, make sure you guys stay tuned for more content.